It's funny because that's almost describing Rassel. He just described Rassel for you.
Also, drawing creepy stuff is really fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's an element in the fantastic that is special to it, and that's that it acknowledges that there's more than we can see, that there's something beyond the veil, so to speak. You know, like what is that? And you can play it up in any way you want. You know, as something supernatural or the Twilight Zone, or you know what I mean. And I think the fantastic has a lot to say, or at least allows you to say a lot.
By the way, I didn't acknowledge this at the top, but we're here at a very interesting time in Jeff's work on Rassel. Last week you delivered the penultimate episode.
Yeah,
one more issue to go. So unfortunately, the latest issue isn't going to be for sale at TCAF because you just sent it off to the printer.
No, I mean I sent it off yesterday. So
How did that feel?
Really good because at the end of the story, it's very complicated. You know, you've got this gigantic 500-page story you've been working on, and
You're gonna tell the end of the story?
yeah. No, not here. I'm not going to. Rassel kills the dog. And I'm about to chicken out. No, I'm not going to tell the end of the story. But you're pulling all these story threads together. You've laid out all these tales, and somehow you've got to pull them all together and in just the right order, and it's got to make sense and not feel, phony or set up too fakey. I mean, you must have run into that at the end of Day Tripper for sure.
Yeah,
were you struggling there? Were you like tearing your hair out?
we never pictured Day Tripper to be, I don't know, it came out a lot better than we planned.
Excellent.
I don't know, the things were clicking. We had the idea, and then we planned very simply, like every chapter. So chapter 1 will be about this, and this will happen, and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4. And I don't know.
We kind of freaked out when we finished issue 9, which is the issue where he dreams, and our editors read it and said, "That's it. That's how the story ends. What are you going to do for issue 10?" And we were kind of worried that people wouldn't like issue 10 because issue 10 was
After
issue 9.
Oh no, issue
9.
10. You have to have issue 10. That's the story.
Yes, that's what we had.
Everything back through the first all 10 issues suddenly makes sense. That's the end.
Yeah, well, but it was the only time that we thought, oh, this better work. This better work. Come on. And it was also the only time that we worked away from home, which we never do. Like some people can work on travel and take pages or write scripts while they're traveling. We never do that. When we travel, we look to people, we talk, we
go out and drink,
we meet people, we get inspired for next stories. Then Day Tripper was the only one that we had to finish away from home.
Have you met Sergio Aragonés?
Oh yes.
Yeah, we
He's awesome, isn't he? That dude also goes out and parties, and yet he always goes back to his room and does like 3 pages. And he just is amazing. He's always working.
Yeah, well, he was the first guy that made me think that comics should be drawn with a brush, because he would draw himself on his comics in Gru or on the Mad Magazine corners. He would be holding a brush and drawing. So I thought, that's how comic artists draw. They hold a brush.
They all have big mustaches.
Yes.
Now, speaking of brush, I mean, I think we're in an interesting transition right now where comics are going from the traditional medium, a lot of which is going to be celebrated at TCAF this weekend, which is done with pen, pencil, paper, and ink, and now a lot of stuff is being done digitally. And I look to you, Fabio. I mean, you did Sugar Shock with that was done on the web and won acclaim. What do you prefer? Do you work, traditionally?
I work very traditionally. Yes, I need the paper. I need to feel the paper. Now it's very hard to see these changes happening because you discover that there is a new readership and there's a new wave of artists that are creating this new readership or supporting this new readership. So it's very strange to do a comic in an old-fashioned way and draw on paper and see the pages and put online and see
Print the books
and see online how they react to it, because it's like you're showing to much more. You have the sensation that you show to much more people because much more people react. And so I'm still adapting to this online universe, but I'm still very much, como fala?
Old school.
Yeah, old school. But very much old school. Even like the latest stories that we've done, we're even coloring with watercolor. So we used to color a lot in the computer because it was faster and easy to correct the mistakes.
In 10 years, we'll be lettering, hand lettering.
Our plan is to start hand lettering. We're going the other way around.
Yeah.
Good.
And what about you, Jeff? Because you do the color with Steve Hamaker, and that seems to be very geared towards it.
I find a great deal of pleasure in pushing puddles of black ink around on the white paper. I really, really love that. I can't really imagine not doing it. But, I do work with Steve Hamaker, who's very much into digital coloring, and he's always trying to show me, come on, ink on the Cintiq, This is like a computer where you actually you can rest your hand on it and draw on it just like a board. And very quickly I was able to ink, and almost indistinguishable from my own ink line, just with the exact same pressure glide and everything. I could get my own ink line, but I don't know, I just might be old school. But I actually just noticed out in the audience is one of my fellow Scholastic graphics guys. I see Kazoo out here now. Hey, Kazoo. Kazoo is like the king. Kazoo Kibuishi, everybody. Amulet. Kazoo is actually, if I was going to point to anybody who was really just embracing drawing comics digitally, it's Kazoo. Because, it's... You actually draw the first things on paper?
I draw on paper.
Do you ink on paper? Or do you just pencil on paper? Wait, whoa, hold on. So first you draw it, then you scan it and enlarge it, and then you print it out and ink it. Oh.
So it's just a big, expensive eraser.
Yeah, it's a big, expensive eraser.
Yeah.
Well, I find that fascinating because I do, when I interview a lot of people in the comic book world, and I see this movement towards the digital that seems very real, very tactile, and younger cartoonists are really gravitating towards it. On the other side, I've just been picking up these wonderful IDW press books, which are these reprinting from the pencils and inks of the creators. So, you get this wonderful Thor work by Walt Simonson. Will Eisner's book is coming out in a few weeks. And I'm looking at the old-fashioned pages and going, this really sings to me. I can feel the artist working on the paper. I can see where he had the cup of coffee.
Cool.
Am I old school, Jeff?
You're old.
No.
You're old.
But I wonder if it's a generational thing, because I also look at the art being created digitally, and now I can see the
I don't know
power in
if
it.
Kazoo is drawn with a pencil first. Then maybe it's not going to be just a complete snap, a complete break. Maybe it'll be just like everything. Digital comics didn't replace comic book stores. They're just a new incremental way to distribute comics.
Yeah.
Well, before we open it up to questions from the audience, and is there something that you guys, that you have a podium and a soapbox, is there something you want to sound off about tonight on the eve of TCAF? Something about do you have a bone to pick with the industry? Do you have no?
Tauntaun. Why do you say that?
Well, okay, let's open it up to the audience then. If you're, anybody want to come to the microphone and sitting right there, go up to the mic. Yeah, go back there.
Jeff Smith. What was the inspiration for Bone?
Let's see.
The kids always make.
I loved cartoons and comics, but from the time I was your age, I used to read them in the Sunday newspaper, and I loved Mad Magazine. And so I guess the Bones were kind of a cross between like Snoopy and Don Martin.
Don Martin.
Oh, Martin.
Wow. I love Don Martin. Yes.
That's a Mad Magazine reference for all you.
So it was, I guess the real answer is that I loved comics so much that I just wanted to make my own. And that's how I got started.
How old were you when you created Bone?
I was probably 5 years old. I mean, the very first drawing I did of Bone, he was like really angry. He had like his mouth was really open. He was screaming. He was like, ah! And my first thought was, I wonder how, and I had drawn this like ridiculous thing that looked like almost like a telephone, which is sort of how the name started. And I was trying to figure out, well, what does he look like with his mouth closed? And so like that was my first struggle with the construction of the drawing. Like, how do you get? And then I made his mouth closed, and then that became Phone Bone, and then the angry one kind of resurfaced again later as Phony Bone. It came back like that.
Now, in interviews I've done with Jeff, he said he's surprised that more young cartoonists don't continue with those characters. Did you guys have characters that you created when you were 5 or 6 years old?
Not really.
They were drawing naked girls at 5.
No, we started copying everything we liked. We didn't create characters and stick with them. We used to copy Garfield and Don Martin and Spy versus Spy.
Yeah, nice.
Well, to build on that question then, but tell me what the sort of second level of Bone, what were the influences in terms of the themes and the territory that you wanted to cover?
Well, I guess it was, when I really started Bone, I was much older, obviously. I had drawn them I drew the characters on my math papers. So they stayed with me, the whole time I was growing up, and I never forgot about them. But it wasn't until college when it was my senior year in high school. I was 17 years old. The year was 1977, and I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time. I'd read Moby Dick for like the third time. Star Wars came out. And what was the third thing? Oh yeah, heavy metal. Heavy metal came out. And all the accoutrements that went with that.
And you guys must have been hugely influenced by heavy metal as well. You can see it in your work.
Well, in Brazil, it was much like the Brazilian comics when we were growing up. They look a lot like
European
comics, and there was much more craziness going on, much more nakedness going on.
Yeah,
it was much, and it wasn't. There was not a lot of censorship in terms of what kids could read, because it was comics.
Yeah, we had just came out from a 20-year dictatorship, so...
It was comics.
Yeah.
Who cares about what's in the comics after the dictatorship? So we could read anything. We discovered from Tarzan, Bunny Hooger drawing Tarzan, to Mad Magazine at the same time, to a Brazilian author who was drawing these crazy 2 priests who were like these pornographer priests.
Wow.
And
one of them was gay, and the other was, very politically incorrect. He was picking on everything. Everything that's wrong was on that comic, and it was amazing.
Hey, that was a good question. Look what you got. I got a good question. Thanks.
My question isn't as good as that. What sets you guys apart from a lot of other creators is that because it's your own work, there's a lot of yourselves in that work. That is very evident as artists. You're putting a lot of yourself into that work, and you're talking about killing the dog. And when those moments come in the story, when you have to kill the dog, where do you draw the line on what to do for the characters, for the stories? And for yourselves, because there is a part of you in that story. How do you do that? Do you refer to an editor? What's the defining factor in those decisions?
Let me just answer that real quick. Well, despite my joke earlier about not liking editors, I obviously have a very close group of people that I trust very much and I bounce ideas off of. And you've got to be willing to listen to them and trust them. And I've had a group around me for over 10 years, a group of small people, plus all my people at Scholastic. But ultimately, the bottom line is it's for the story. The story is the bottom line. And even if it's something that I'm chickening out a little bit on, when Charles questioned me on it, I knew he was right. And that was the story. That had to be it. It was hard to do, but it was what was true for the story, and that is the bottom line.
Yeah, I think the hard part sometimes it's realizing that the story is the most important thing, because sometimes you want to draw something really bad, or sometimes you want to tell a story that needs to be, you have expectations for the story in terms of what you can or you cannot tell, and sometimes you don't even know how to face that part of the story. You don't have the maturity to deal with some stuff, and that's where other people help, because they are your bouncing board. And
When you two have each other, that
yeah,
sounds like
I
an
think for
amazing
us
thing.
it was a
Have his
huge,
phone number?
yeah, it was a huge difference to have each other and to be straight with each other about how we could always do better in terms of the story.
We can
Yeah.
Skype, and I can say, is this picture lazy?
Well, very early on, Jeff, I used to, after every issue of Bone came out, a number of people,
Yeah.
including myself, would call you up and we would critique
You
each
were
issue.
one of my trusted people that I believed. In fact, I made changes that you suggested, a couple of big ones. One was, I don't even know if I even ever told you that you made me do this. But I originally packaged the Bone books into, we didn't call them graphic novels back then because they weren't really called that. They were called trade paperbacks. But I was doing the first Bone graphic novels basically, but I was just doing them chronologically. It's just whatever 6 issues I did that last year, I put them together in that book. Well, the third one came out, and it kind of followed like this story. There was clearly a moment where the story ended, but it wasn't the one that was the last story in the third book. It was the first story in the next book. And you were livid. You were like, what? Are you thinking that story belonged in the last book? That should have been the end. And you were right. And that's actually why I don't know if you remember what it was. It was like
It was the crossing the threshold moment.
Yes, this is the moment. It's like the end of the first act of Bone. The funny stuff is kind of over. The serious stuff is kicked in, and they pack up and leave the farm. And the last panel is them literally walking over the threshold of the barn door. The shadow of the barn door is like cutting them like right down the middle. And you said that was the end of the last story. And I actually went back and I trashed all my trade books, completely redressed them so that they had new trade dress, so that they became, instead of the Complete Bone Adventures, Volume 1, 2, or 3, they became, they started to be calling Out from Boneville, or The Great Cow Race, or Eyes of the Storm, and they had names. But that was a huge shift, because at that time, graphic novels were only, The Complete Crazy Cat, or something like that.